Thank you, thank you, Raul, and thank you for all of the organizers for this opportunity. That was very moving, and I'm glad we've had a moment of silence already. That's very important at these meetings, I think. I'm going to try to give a brief history of the idea of one democratic state, and it seems to me it has three periods. One is very recent, the last 20 years. The other one was between roughly 1964 and 1984, when the resistance organizations and the PLO were quite strongly for one secular state, democratic state. And the third period that people don't know much about was during the Mandate, 1918 to 1948. And so that's what I'm mainly going to be talking about, because it's the least known of the periods. The recent history, shortly, for me it began with 4 books published in 2004 every year. One came out in English. First was Mazin Kumsie's Sharing the Land of Canaan. Then second came Virginia Tilley's The One State Solution. Then Ali Abounemma's One Country. And in 2007, Ghada Karmi's Married to Another Man. There were also after that, there were a lot of anthologies and books that came out. They're listed in the paper that I wrote for this conference, which is a bit longer, and you got it all by email on Wednesday. I'm sure everybody's already read it, but there are a few printed copies over here if anybody would like a copy. And there's more detail in there about the books and the conferences that have happened recently. The conferences I can remember are the Haifa One Democratic State Right of Return. That was the title of those 2 conferences. They coupled right of return and ODS very closely, 2008 and 2010. And Samir Abedrabo had a conference in 2010 in Dallas, in Texas. He also wrote a paper. He couldn't be here today, and the organizers sent that around to you also in an email. Then others, Munich 2012, Stuttgart 2013, Zurich 2014, Cork about, it was ODS, but the official title was The Legitimacy of Israel, or rather the illegitimacy of Israel. And that was in Cork in 2017, and there were a few in Ramallah that I know of. What else? Boston, Toronto, there have been many ODS conferences. The Palestinians during the Mandate, when I was researching my book, I kept running across statements that were exactly like ODS today. That's what they were pleading for from the British and the League of Nations. Now, a lot of those quotations, about 60 of them, are in my book, which is here. It's a reference book on the British-Palestinian dialogue, such as it was during the Mandate. So a lot is in here. It's also a free download as a PDF at the websites that are at the top of the paper that I wrote. So it's actually for free. You can also get an ebook version for €6. Okay, at first, in around 1919, the political resistance to the British colonialists took the form of local Muslim Christian associations, all Palestine Arab congresses, Arab high committees, and Arab offices. There were 7 Palestinian Arab congresses between 1919 and 1928. The first one resolved, quote, that Palestine shall be called Southern Syria, and that the government be constitutional and independent. Now, in this context at that time, constitutional meant democratic, with protection for individual rights. And in March 1920, something amazing happened, and that is that there was an independent kingdom of Syria established in Damascus, which covered, of course, what's today is Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Jordan. The king was to be Emir Faisal. But the king was subservient to the parliament, which they called the Representative Assembly. And they actually wrote a 147-article constitution. I'll just give one quote from there. It said, "Syria is to be a constitutional monarchy based on principles of democratic and broadly decentralized rule, which shall safeguard the rights of minorities." The last point of safeguarding the rights of minorities was included in all later Palestinian visions, which shows that they were aware of the problem of the tyranny of majority, because of the majority, if you just say democratic, if that just means majority rule, well, are there no restrictions on the majority? Well, of course there are. And that's what's in this concept of constitution. So they were trying to safeguard the safeguards, if you will. Then in July 1920, something not so surprising happened. That is that the French came in with their army and got rid of the independent state of Syria. So the model state for the Arab world lasted only 4 months. Of course, the minority they had mainly to deal with was Jewish. Early on, they repeatedly said that those Jews who had permanently resided in Palestine since, quote, before the war, the First World War, or, quote, before the application of the Zionist policy, end quote, could of course stay as citizens. The PLO would choose this criterion in its charters of 1964 and 1968. They said Jews who were there before the Zionist invasion. That's the best English translation, I think, of the charter. Now, over time, they became more open, and in the end, as of 1939, they were ready to welcome all resident Jews as citizens. But they realized that this was, quote, a sacrifice or a compromise, because these immigrants were Europeans and they had been forced upon them. The British enabled them to come, but the people did not want that. They wanted to decide their own immigration policy. But often, just like today, also the condition was set that the non-indigenous, non-Arab Jews would have to renounce Zionism. And Raoul said something in his introduction similar to this. As they once put it, quote, the ones who would be willing to live peacefully and loyally in Palestine. This is a quote from maybe the year 1929. I don't know, but it was way back, almost 100 years ago. Again, as of 1939, this somewhat vague condition was dropped, and they could all stay. Now, as of 1929, there was a lot of talk about, quote, the Jews, but every group would be represented in the government by, quote, in proportion to their numbers. So what this meant was ethno-religious quotas. And of course, this goes against ODS in Palestine, ODS initiative. However, the Palestinians never for a moment during the mandate called for binationalism, or what was also then called parity between two groups. That is, ethical, historical, and political equality of the groups. They said, even assuming the Jews were a nation, they had no collective national rights in Palestine. Somewhere else maybe, but not in Palestine. And they made it clear that politically, the Palestinian indigenous people owned Palestine, period. So the concept of who owns Palestine was very clear to them. The battle against binationalism during the Mandate was detailed and heated. As far back as 1912, there were some Jewish groups. Two of them are Ha-Magen, which I think means the shield, and Ichud, around the famous Judah Magnes. And they propounded binationalism, as did the British very often, especially at the end of the Mandate. And the Palestinians had to argue against that, as well as against the two-state solution, which then ran under the euphemism partition. And George Antonius, Jamal al-Husseini, and Musa Alami, who were the main negotiators, well, there were others, Auni Abdul Hadi, there were many heroes of that time. And they said, quote, to the British, communalism had not been a part of politics before the war, and a non-communal constitution would impel all the inhabitants towards a feeling of equal citizenship in a unitary state, end quote. Musa did once propose a Jewish canton from Tel Aviv to Atlit, but that was more federalism, it wasn't binationalism. A final part of the Palestinians' vision should, I think, be important to us today, namely that they didn't have a battle with the Jews as Jews. And they repeatedly said this in so many words, in all of their manifestos. And they said that the long, peaceful history of coexistence in Arab lands was proof of that. And George Antonius wrote this amazing book in 1938, The Arab Awakening. He said, quote, "Our attitude is not dictated by any hostility to the Jewish race. The problem is fundamentally one in which an aspirant nation from abroad aimed at ousting from its secular holding the nation in possession at home," end quote. Now, I'm going to interject something from 2023 here. In Mondoweiss, the online journal, Mohammed El-Kurd wrote an article in September 2023. Its title was, "Jewish settlers stole my house. It's not my fault, they're Jewish." And they really did steal his house in East Jerusalem. So what the message was from Antonius and now from Mohammed El-Kurd, oh my God, okay, was that these colonizers just happened to be Jewish. That was the point. They kicked out the Crusaders who happened to be Christian. Now, there were many efforts after World War II. One was a long 400-page document from the Arab office pleading with the British and the Americans to give them independence. They had a lot of help from Syrians and also Fares Khoury and Iraqis like, what was his, Al-Jamali, I can't remember his first, Fadil. Now, even the United States after Resolution 181. Okay, this was a full-blown constitution that they presented to the US and to the UN, but it didn't get anywhere because partition won with Resolution 181. Even the US Americans said, after seeing what 181 was doing, they introduced their own ODS constitution. But Truman got rid of that in 1948. Okay. Now, after the Nakba, I don't know enough yet of the official positions of PLO and the PNC. Of course, received wisdom is that they were for one secular state, and I believe that's true, but if anybody can help me with references, I would appreciate it. Youssef Saïk was a member of the Palestinian, the executive committee of the PLO, and he wrote a book in 1970 which spelled it all out. Could I just say something about Hamas? I have one last paragraph about Hamas. Okay, what about Hamas? Its 2017 document of general principles and policies comes close to ODS. Its goal is, here quoting Article 20, the full and complete liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea. Its Article 30 upholds, quote, democratic principles, foremost among them free and fair elections. Other Articles 4 or 5 uphold ethno-religious non-discrimination. Articles 18 and 19 declare, quote, Israel is entirely illegal, and there shall be no recognition of the legitimacy of the Zionist entity. Article 16 says, Hamas does not wage a struggle against the Jews because they are Jewish, but wages a struggle against the Zionists who occupy Palestine. Thank you.